Hello, I'm Tom Bailey, and in today's episode, I'll be getting to know Patrick Helmers, who's the founder of Habanero Media and is a former software engineer, inventor, turned tech startup entrepreneur, business development executive, and then podcast host of the Top 10 Sales Babble podcast. So, Patrick, hello, and a very warm welcome to today's episode.
Thanks, Tom, for having me here. It's quite an honor to be chatting with you this morning.
Fantastic. I really appreciate it. And just out of interest, whereabouts are you in the world right now?
Chicago,
incredible. So I just want to share a little bit more about the hot pepper company, Habanero Media, before we get started. And so they are a podcast agency that help B2B businesses grow revenue by integrating interview-based podcasts into a selling process that targets qualified C-suite execs. The title for today's episode is How Podcasting Can Target C-Suite Executives and Grow Sales. And Patrick is going to show us how to do that in just 7 minutes. So question one today is, who are your ideal clients?
People who do marketing campaigns, executives for large companies who want to get their message out, who are struggling with people who are hard to get a hold of, like C-suite executives. A lot of them are on LinkedIn, but they rarely logged in. With work from home because of the pandemic, it's very difficult to get them on the telephone. You're not really sure where they're at. Are they at home? Are they in the office? It's hard to build a relationship, but a podcast is a great way of getting people engaged and being open to meeting you. So that's the ideal client. People who are C-suite executives who are looking to meet other C-suite executives.
Excellent. And when you think of your ideal clients, what would you say is typically the biggest challenge that they face?
Being heard, meeting people, prospecting, talking to qualified leads.
Yeah, makes complete sense. And I guess if you're unable to reach out to your qualified leads and prospects, what impact would that typically have on them or their business?
Oh, absolutely. It's just that it'd be horrible, right? You have no revenue. If you don't have revenue, then you don't have profit, right?
Yeah, and I guess you're always just chasing that next potential client, which are obviously difficult to find.
Yep.
So therefore, what would you say is one valuable piece of advice that you might give to somebody to really help them or get started or solve this problem?
In classic sales, there's always a discovery process. When you first meet a prospect, your goal is just to get a meeting. And when you start chatting with them, you try to understand whether or not you can help them, whether or not you're a good fit for them, their pains, their problems, their desires, their hopes, all of that happens in a discovery call. If you were to move that discovery call into a podcast, actually an interview, it would all be the same process. But people are much more open to that because they're going to feel like they're not being sold. They're not being, nothing's going to be pushed on them. People love to be treated, love to be honored for what they have to say. A lot of people want to happily give advice on things that they know about. So if they're being asked to be a guest on your podcast, they're much more likely to say, "Yeah, that sounds great."
Absolutely, and for the guest, like you said, it's a opportunity to build credibility, positioning, reputation, to be seen as an expert in their industry. So absolutely, you're more likely to get a yes by asking that question.
That's what I've found to be true.
Fantastic. Okay, great. So therefore, again, if somebody would like to find out more about how they can do this or get started, what is one valuable resource that you can share with people to help them move on and get started with this?
At habaneromedia.net, we have a ton of blogs that give advice on how to interview people, what kinds of questions to ask, the process for reaching out to people to get them to become guests on a podcast. They go to habaneromedia.net. There's a whole bunch of blog posts, and it's all free, and people are more than happy to read, more than happy to download all of those.
Incredible. And what I'll do is I'll post a link to the blog specifically on the show notes. And I've also got another URL that you provided here, which is the Big Sales. Do you want to talk a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, that's an interesting article that if they sign up for that will actually talk about return on investment. Like, for the kind of cost it would take to start up a podcast, are you certain that you would get more money in return. You get a return on investment. This document actually walks you through that process so that you can calculate that out and see if it's a good fit for your company.
Super useful. So yeah, what I'll do is I'll share a link to that one in the show notes as well, so people can click on that and they can find out more about that ROI, or return on investment. So next question from me is about yourself, actually. So what would you say is one of your greatest either mistakes, learnings, or failures that you've made either in life or business? And what specifically did you learn from it?
That's a good question. I think the biggest mistake that I've made in life is not listening well enough. Yeah. Being too quick to like promote something or push something or talk. And I've found that the more I listened and the more I became curious on what people are thinking, the more success that I've found. That's why I think podcasting has been a good fit for me, Tom. Mm-hmm. It allows me to ask questions and to honestly listen.
Yeah.
And
yeah, I love that. And like you said, that valuable lesson that you've learned has now led you into being a better podcast host as well, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm. I know. Yeah, you're right. You're right. And you've done a terrific job asking questions and listening yourself.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm getting there. And I have got one final question for you today, and that is, what is the one question that I should have asked you that will also bring some great value to our audience today?
What are you working on today?
That's a good question. And what are you working on today?
I'm so glad you asked me. I'm launching a brand new podcast.
Oh, incredible. Let's talk about that.
It's good. It's called the Cannabis Advocate Podcast.
Okay.
It's all about people who don't know a lot about cannabis, but they're very curious about it and what the benefits are they could add to their life. I'm launching it next week for a reason, because I'm actually attending a conference on cannabis at the end of the month for the very specific goal of what we're talking about here today. I'm going to walk the trade show, talk to vendors, interview them, and see if any of them would be interested in starting a podcast themselves, of which Habanero Media would be the one running the podcast, launching the podcast. So I'm actually putting into work all the things that we spoke about today.
Absolutely. Well, good luck at the conference then. Hopefully it goes well. And yeah, maybe I'll interview you on that podcast one day in the future.
It's a super fun podcast. I've got some awesome interviews in place. I've edited 5 of them. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'm very excited about it.
Absolutely. And feel free to share a link with me for that podcast as well. And I'll be happy to drop that into the show notes as well below this episode. So, Patrick, thanks again for your time today. I really appreciate you coming along and sharing such great value and expertise with our audience.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate it. I appreciate being here. Thank you.